My name is Ethan Pease. I am a Wisconsin native. I'll just get right into it. During the run-up to and on Election Day, I was working as a temporary hire at United Mailing Services, a USPS subcontracting company in Madison, Wisconsin. In September or October, I began to deliver mail-in ballots from United Mailing Services to the USPS as part of my evening box truck run. I knew that I would be taking ballots because there would always be a mail cart marked for me for ballots only with a special green tag that said for ballots only. On November 2nd, 2020, I noticed that there was only one ballot in the bin for delivery to USPS, and on November 3rd, Election Day, there were no ballots in the bin for delivery to USPS. I did not think of that as strange at the time. It was Election Day, the polls were closing that day. You'd think that the ballots would kind of trickle down and be done. So you guys can imagine my surprise that when on the next day, November 4th, a senior USPS employee, whose name I do know, had asked me if I'd forgotten any ballots the night before, election night. He explained to me that an order had come down from the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of USPS that 100,000 ballots were missing. He then told me that his post office, the one at Milwaukee Street in Madison, Wisconsin, had dispatched employees to look for the missing ballots around 4 a.m. November 4th. He said, and I quote, around 4 a.m. And that only 7 or 8 ballots were found at United Mailing Services, my work. Based on my previous experience and habit of double checking for the ballots, I believe that to be a lie immediately. The following day, November 5th, 2020, I had a conversation with a different USPS employee, whose name I also know, in which she admitted that USPS employees were ordered to backdate ballots that were received too late to be lawfully counted. I asked this employee if I would be getting in trouble for those ballots the night before with my own boss, just kind of making sure that I was covered, because at first I did think perhaps I did miss ballots, but I couldn't have if they weren't on the cart where they're supposed to be. The employee said, no, I wouldn't, as long as they were postmarked for the 3rd. And then she hesitated for a moment and said that's why they had us do that, referring to USPS employees. I didn't bring any of this to the attention of the supervisors at the USPS at the time, due to what I perceived to be their hostility towards the president and their evident contempt of the law. I've heard those same employees make jokes about asking customers who came into the post office lobby, who did you vote for? Oh, President Trump? Okay. And then they would reference throwing the ballots directly into the trash. I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a Biden supporter. I voted for Joe Jordan's in this election, and I voted Libertarian in the Wisconsin governor's race in 2018, which was my first election that I could vote in. But I know that something wrong happened here, and I just want to see that something gets done about it for our state and for the people of our state so that people can have faith in our elections. The bottom line of this is, why was the USPS even looking for ballots on November 4th, hours after the polls closed at 8 p.m.?
You mentioned an employee of, I think you said it was of the USPS, told you that they were ordered to backdate ballots that came in after November 3rd. And I was wondering if that individual said anything about where those orders came from.
All that I was told was that it came down as an order from the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of the USPS. So I would assume that that is a top-down order.
In Wisconsin, our law is that the ballots need to be received by the close of Election Day at 8 p.m. So if the Wisconsin-Illinois chapter of the United States Postal Service backdated ballots on the 4th, which was the day after, where were they delivered? They couldn't legally be counted anyway. Do you happen to know where they were delivered?
All that I know is that when I would take the ballots to the post office, they would be loaded onto usually the 830 truck that would go to Milwaukee, and from there I do not know where it would go. The USPS also has extensive security cameras at all of their loading docks and their facilities, so if a proper investigation is done into this, then all of that should be able to be found. As someone who got to directly see how the ballots were moving through the system, mail-in ballots, I voted in person. I didn't want to take any chances with my ballot getting lost or just anything happening to it with the lengthy chain of custody that I've seen firsthand.
Hi, my name is Bart Williams, a Wisconsin resident. I was an election observer at Central Count in Milwaukee on Election Day. I also observed the so-called Democracy in the Park on October 3rd. I also participated in the recount in Milwaukee and Madison. I arrived at Central Count on November 3rd, 2020 at 6 a.m., but was not allowed by a posted guard in the lobby to go to the Central Count area floor, the fourth floor, until 7 o'clock. Then I had to wait in line, present photo ID, sign in, and await instructions from the ballot processing counting leadership staff. Thus, I was not able to actually start observing until at least 7:30 a.m. I was excluded from at least the first full 30 minutes observing the ballot processing counting. And by the way, I was in the first group up the elevators, so nobody could observe, of the observers, could observe those first 30 minutes. Try to observe meaningful ballot details, such as whether there's a witness's address or a reason marked on the ballot for why the ballot was duplicated, such it was destroyed. You can't do it from those distances. So what I'm saying is this. At most, we're able to observe 25 to 33% of the ballots, at most, because the second and third rows of tables on each side of that wide aisle were barred from us from being able to access. You were simply too far away to be able to see anything, and they knew this. Another issue with that is indefinite confined. If you look down the ballot certification, right near where the address is, it would say indefinite. If that person claimed they were indefinitely confined, you can't see that key detail at these distances. So we undercounted how many indefinitely confined ballots there might have been on the certificates because they didn't let us see them. So once you left that chair, which eventually you have to go to the bathroom, the Democrat runs and jumps in that chair, and you literally can only observe from the side, to continue my analysis, from the Atlantic Ocean. You can only maybe barely see Maine and Florida. You can't see the other tables. And so it was hours before I could even see those other two tables again. That's why I'm saying probably it's closer to 25% is the most we could see of all the ballots and certifications. Total quality concepts tell you that when you have a highly manual process like ballot processing and counting, there is significant variation in manual processes. Therefore, if we were not able to see most of the manual processes involved in these ballot processing and counting, it's more accurate to say we saw none of the process than to say we saw 100% of the process. So keep that in mind. Only 15 total observers from each party or independents were allowed in Central Count per shift. This was way too low of a number to allow anything approaching full observation access to all the tables. At best, we could maybe only cover or observe 20 to 25% of all the tables, of all the total tables, many dozens, with 15 observers, again, at best. The small total number of observers from each party was also a huge and I believe illegal access restriction. With 45 to 60 observers of each affiliation allowed in at one time, social distancing could have been maintained and transparency and lawful public access greatly increased. I hereby dispute as false any excuse by election officials to the contrary. Since ballot processing counting is a highly manual process, it was important that we got access to all of the process, but we didn't. So I picked up a form to start tracking the voter name and ballot ID number of each ballot certification envelope on which I saw issues. Occasionally, since we were talking through masks, and again, there's a team of tables and you're sitting behind them, you can't hear them all the time because they're talking towards each other and they're talking through a mask. So occasionally I'd have to ask, can you repeat that last name again? Or I didn't catch the last three numbers of that ballot number. They got annoyed at me and didn't want to do it, but they did it. Well, after 5, the person got up, got a supervisor, and I was barred from ever continuing my log again because they don't want us to have specifics on actual issues that we're seeing. That, again, is a problem. I think it's an illegality. Fairly early during first shift, Ms. Woodall-Vaugh twice made loud announcements to all people present that if ballot processors counters came across a ballot certification envelope with a missing address for the witness, they could go to the computer, look up the witness's address, and write it in. I immediately objected to this due to, among many valid other concerns, what about a witness with a very common name, such as John Smith? I was told by a supervisor that the worker could just assume it was the John Smith on the same street as the voter or else the closest one to the voter's address. I said, what about if that John Smith lived across town. They didn't care. They were just going to put down the one that was convenient, and they didn't care that technically this is ballot tampering, and it's illegal in violation of both sections 6.87 subsection D and 6.87 subsection 9 of the Wisconsin statutes. The election officials told us not to expect many skinny or express ballots, but there were many. I estimate they comprised 25 to 35% of all the ballots I saw. I was told by a supervisor that express ballots came from one of two places, either building, and she didn't say the other one. She said they were for people who had a hard time writing. They could use a special keyboard or machine at one of those two buildings to generate an express ballot. This seems very suspicious to me. Unlikely there were that many people who actually had a hard time writing. Plus, two supervisors acknowledged there were a lot more express ballots than they had expected. Given the newness, large number, and highly susceptible to fraud and abuse nature of these express ballots, I would hope that they were audited closely and heavily during the recount, but I suspect that they were not. As a direct result of Claire Woodall-Vogg's and other supervisors' acts, I was unable to fulfill my responsibilities or exercise my rights to meaningful observation as an election observer at Central Count in Milwaukee on Election Day, November 3rd.
I'm David Bolter. I am a retired 32-year Army colonel that have served this country both in regular Army and Army Reserve. I was also an Inspector General for the Army, and I've done obviously many things in the 32 years of service here and abroad. I was employed as one of the approximately 3,000 poll workers at the 2020 national election. In particular, I was assigned as a paid ballot counter. Thousands of ballots that came to the central count went through my hands. I objected to what looked like countless occasions unconfirmed witness addresses on ballot envelopes. I saw their signature and I saw their address. Sometimes different ink, sometimes different handwriting all together. That's big. I saw many ballot envelopes that had no signature in the witness signature line, but the signature was obviously placed someplace else. When I did place the objections several times, Ms. Woodall-Vogg basically announced to the entire fourth floor that if there is a second signature anywhere on the envelope, that was considered admissible. Many of the ballot envelopes I received were already opened or unsealed on arrival. I stated my objections as well, which were basically cast aside. I'm guesstimating upwards of 15 to possibly upwards of 20% were in that state. At approximately 1 in the morning, an announcement was made that a truck or trucks full of ballots were arriving shortly. While I did not physically witness the arrival of the trucks, this activity was similar, as we've heard in days to follow, systematic fraud claims in other states. In summary, the idea of systematic corruption is still a matter of debate. It's not yet factual in the sense of an established illegality. That can only happen in a criminal court. But for the sake of the Republic, the ideas of the nation which I fought for 3 decades, both here and abroad, and the voice of the American people to elect their leaders, I hope it does.